Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we're going to start with the most important update that is coming from Zaporizhzhia area. Let's take a look at this video because I believe that most of you have already seen this video, but let's take a look at this video one more time. On this video we see the Russian drone was flying deep in the Ukrainian rear, and this Russian drone was making footage, and at some second of this footage of this situation the Russians attacked this territory with missiles. There were two strikes, and as a result of the second strike half of the building was reduced to ruins, and so this is the situation. Let's take a look one more time. And let's take a look one more time. Let's try to understand what kind of weapon the Russians were using for this attack. Obviously, the Russians were using not the Tornado S system, because Tornado S system the Russians usually use against, let's say, manpower accumulation of forces against the railways. According to my understanding of the situation, the Russians were using either Iskander or even Kinjal. If the Russians were using Iskander, then this is just a regular and common situation where the Russians were trying to get another headquarters. But if the Russians were using Kinjal, that means that the Russians were hunting somebody very, very important. If you remember, yesterday we have already discussed the situation, and according to the updates that we got yesterday, the Russians reported that they managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian brigade Spartan. So, according to information we got yesterday, and according to geolocations, the Spartan brigade currently is located in the vicinity of Orykhov, so very close to the situation. During the day, let's say on the 16th of November, we received a lot of updates that was the strike against the 115th brigade. But if we take a look at the redeployment map, we're gonna find the 115th Territory Defense Brigade somewhere in Kiev area on the process of redeployment and, let's say, regrouping after that brigade was defeated somewhere along the combat line. And just today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation provided us their daily report, and according to the Ministry of Defense, that was the strike against the headquarters of 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. And this is the brigade. This brigade, let's say, native position of this brigade is located in the vicinity of Maly Sherbaki, Kupyansk, so in the area where the Russians recently have already started their offensive operation. This is 128th Brigade. But the most important that was not the first strike against the headquarters of that brigade. If you remember, a few days ago, to be more precise, on the 4th of November, we got update from the same city. You see, this is the same city, Zaporizhzhia, or according to the Russian title, Dmitrov. Let's say on the 4th of November, we got update how, if you remember, the Ukrainians concentrated and accumulated significant number of their officers, soldiers, higher rank officers, very experienced soldiers, let's say the veterans of that brigade, for some nominations, and they were planning to have some parties. Understand, the Russians discovered that situation, and they also attacked this territory, but this is the result of the previous explosion. And as you can see, there is a difference between this explosion, this one, and the explosion that took place, for example, that was published in the videos that was published today. Completely two different types of explosions, and as I understand, the previous time the Russians were using Tornado S, and today they were using Iskander. Anyway, as you can see, that was the second strike during the previous during the months, during November, during the previous 10 days, and obviously we understand that the 128th Brigade obviously lost its combat capabilities, and currently the Ukrainians will try to remove this brigade from the combat line for redeployment, for regrouping, for finding new officers and commanders and generals of this brigade, while the Russians will continue their offensive operation on the line between Luhovo, Zherebyanki and Petsikhatki. Some sources are saying that that was like a traitor or rat among the Ukrainians who provided the information about the disposition of Ukrainian forces and so on, but as I understand, those talks about the rat and traitor were just something like speculations, because the Russians do have a lot of equipment. They have satellites, they have drones flying above the headquarters of 128th Brigade. I believe that the Russians were collecting information for a very long time. Obviously, they managed to make all the necessary calculations and conclusions, and basically they found the disposition of Ukrainian headquarters. And this is just a regular and common military job of reconnaissance forces. When talking about the entire scope of the Zaporizhzhia area and Bradley Square, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks, and 1 artillery system, Kherson B. When talking about Bradley Square, the Ukrainians continued their offensive operation on the flanks of this square, trying to improve their positions in the north of Verbova and trying to improve their positions in the vicinity of Robotyne. All those attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians had significant forces. The Ukrainians during the day tried to evacuate a lot of wounded soldiers, but most of the evacuation machines were destroyed or damaged as a result of attack with FPV drone strike. So a few words to underline the entire situation. The Ukrainians are in a very bad situation on Zaporizhzhia direction, but for some reason they continue their offensive operation, trying to penetrate the Russians' defense belt. Now we are moving to Donetsk area, because this is the second area of the most important updates of the previous 24 hours, and the most important from this direction are coming obviously from the northern flank of Avdiivka. And of course, in the previous video, we have already discussed that the Russians managed to improve their positions on the northern flank of this area. And as a result of offensive operation, the Russians got very close to the village that's located between the railways. And I'm talking about this territory. When talking about the global scope and strategical points, if the Russians are able to establish control over this village that's located between the railways, obviously the Russians would receive and gain significant superiority, and we can start counting days not just when Avdiivka falls, but probably the entire foothold of the Ukrainian forces in this area fall. But for now, the Russians are very far from this area, and they just managed to establish control over these 3 lines and the trenches. So that was the first update about the Russian progress. But the most important updates is coming from the chemical plant. As we discussed for many times in the past, that the Russians took a decision not to attack this territory, not to encircle Avdiivka using, let's say, wide encirclement by attacking, let's say, very far from Avdiivka, making a very long hook from the north and making a very long hook from the south. The Russians took a decision to work faster, to work smarter, and to find the shortest way. It's not like the easiest way, but it's the shortest way. And as we discussed in the previous videos, obviously the shortest way to collapse Avdiivka is to attack from the first day of the storming and the Avdiivka news operation, the chemical plant. And since the beginning of that operation, we've been expecting when the Russians will start publishing us the videos or geolocations from this territory. And today we got the first updates from chemical plant, and that video was published by the Ukrainian sources. On this video we see how the Russian soldiers were established their positions along the, let's say, some tree line, along some, I don't know, wall, and the Ukrainians FPV drones were bombing and attacking the Russians. If we move this video to geolocation on map, we're gonna see that the Russian soldiers were attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drone on this line. So obviously that video was published one more time by the Ukrainian sources, so that was a part of propaganda. But obviously based on that video we can say 100% sure that the Russians managed to reach this line, and they were about to start the landing operation and storming operation of the first buildings in the chemical plant. And the first goal and the first target of the Russians obviously was to establish control over this small, let's say, industrial area. There are a few buildings, maybe a few barracks with underground facilities, and the Russians were planning to use this area as the main base, as the main foothold for further offensive operation. This area has a strict connection with the Russian mainland, let's say in the vicinity of Terikon. There is a road very close to, and these roads obviously lead the Russian forces to Krasnogorovka. So the Russians were trying to make this small island in chemical plant at the first step in the storming process of the northern flank of Avdiivka. For now, we don't have any geolocated confirmation whether the Russians were able to establish control over this area or not, but I believe, and something tells me, that the Russians managed to do this, and as I understand, during the next 48 hours, we're going to receive the first confirmation of that fact. When talking about southern direction, we haven't received anything from this area. After very big progress in the vicinity of Tsarskaya Khota fortification and the southern industrial area, the Russians took a small operational pause. The Ukrainians managed to bring some reinforcements and reserves in this area, trying to stabilize the situation, but we understand that Ukrainians don't have chances to stabilize this area because of complete absence of counter-artillery duels, because this area is located too far from the main Ukrainian artillery positions, and this area located too close to the Russian artillery positions, and the Russians don't have any problems with rounds, with artillery fire and support. Furthermore, the sources are saying that Ukrainians, starting off today, began to redeploy and remove the Western weapon from Avdiivka, and the Ukrainians started the replacement process of special forces, of the most, let's say, well-prepared forces with territory defense brigades from all over the Ukraine. So currently the Ukrainians are trying to repeat the same process as we used to see in Bahmut. When Bahmut got encircled from north and the southern part, the Ukrainians started removing the most qualified and important and special forces from Bahmut, and they started replacement them with territory defense forces. So now we see the same process, and according to this pattern, we understand that we can probably start counting days. So anyway, the days of Avdiivka are numbered, and I understand this. I'm not sure whether you understand this or not, but the days of Avdiivka are numbered. According to the Ministry of Defense, as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 240 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, including 110, and 7 artillery systems. After a very short operational pause, we start receiving more updates from Krasnogorovka direction. On this video, we see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the southern outskirts of the village or the city, and probably the Russians started preparation before the next wave of attack inside of the city. If you remember, during the previous days of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the southern part in the vicinity of the coal mine, and now they are ready to start offensive operation exactly in direction of the village. So I suppose that probably within the next 48 hours we're going to see more attempts how the Russians will try to establish control over this defense belt. So the edge defense belt, and if this defense belt falls, then the Russians will be able to start offensive operation against the city. And we also got, after small operational pause, first updates from Novomikhailivka. On this video we see artillery preparation and bombardment of the city with all types of weapons that the Russians have. Aviation bombardments, like regular 152mm rounds. Anyway, everything is also about to start before the next wave of attack in direction of Novomikhailivka, from both directions, either from the north and from the south. Now we are moving to Bahmut, Artyomov's direction, and we will bypass Gorlovka because during the day we haven't received any updates regarding the 30 constant landfills in this area, and as I understand we're going to receive some updates later. Now let's talk about Artyomovsk Bahmut direction. To be more precise, let's start this conversation from the small village by the name of Spirne, this area. During the day we got at least 3 geolocated videos, and some of them about the Russians, some of them about the Ukrainians, but probably the most terrible update of the special military operation, probably since the beginning of the special military operation, we received exactly from this village. I'm not saying that this is the first case during the special military operation, but as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first case geolocated during the special military operation. We will, in a few minutes, we will start discussion. First of all, let's take a look at this video. The Russians probably were demining this area, and they concentrated and accumulated the mines somewhere in the vicinity between Spirne and Berestova. The Ukrainians managed to discover the small warehouse of mines, and as a result of FPV drone strike, they destroyed this area. They just blown up everything, and this is not the first case during the special military operation. Just yesterday, if you remember, we discussed another case in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka when the Russian soldiers were collecting the mines around the burned and destroyed abandoned armored vehicle, and then as a result of FPV drone strike, like up to 20 Russian soldiers died being hit by the parts of those mines mines and armored vehicle. So this is not the case, and as you can see, this is very unsafe and dangerous to collect mines very close to the combat line. More updates are coming from Spirne itself. The Russians continue bombardments and attackings of the Ukrainian edge positions, edge strongholds and fortifications with FPV drone. We're using this video just to geolocate the combat line and to understand that something happens in this direction. So this is also not the most important video, just a regular military routine that tells us that something happens in the vicinity of Spirne as well. And there is the final video, this one, and we will not watch this video till the end. I will just explain you give you the description of this video. The Russians, the author of the Russians reported that they managed to capture another stronghold of the Ukrainians somewhere in the vicinity of Spirne, and the Russian soldiers were moving like along the trenches that were filled completely with the Ukrainian dead soldiers, and he stopped at some moment. He turned his camera on the ground, and there were few women lying on the ground with machine guns, in the, let's say, armor, in the helmets, and they were like stormtroopers. And he was saying, like, take a look, these women that currently start fighting with the Russians, and they're not just like bus drivers, or they're not like snipers, they were like stormtroopers, like Wagner's, like real men who was fighting like in the buildings, in the cities. So they were like a real warrior, but they were women, like long hairs, they were blondies, so it's like terrible. And they were of course killed as a result of maybe artillery strike or FPV drone strike, and that was the most terrible probably scene I've seen since the beginning of the special military operation. Of course, if you have access to the Patreon, you can access to the map, and take a look at this video. But these things tells me that this is just the beginning, and when the Ukrainians will waste their men, obviously they will start with women, and Ukrainians do have endless reserves, but because now there are more and more women are involved in this conflict, and the situation is going to be worse and worse. Now we are moving to Kupyansk and Lyman directions. We also have some Telegram reports. For example, the Russians reported as a result of clashes on Lyman direction, the Ukrainians lost 175 soldiers, very big level of losses, and there is something big is happening here, but we for some reason are not receiving any updates from the ground, and this is very weird. And I start worrying about this because like 4 or 5 days in a row we have the losses from 170 soldiers till 210 soldiers, so the heaviest losses during the special military operation, and no footage, no scenes, no updates. When talking about Kupyansk direction, we got some updates either. The Russians continued their offensive operation, and today they published another video in between the Lyman Первый and Sinkovka. On this video we see the Ukrainian personal carrier, a Kazakh who was trying to evacuate personnel, or maybe who was moving from one position to another, but the Russians discovered this Kazakh, and as a result of strike that machine was destroyed. We're using this video just to geolocate approximately the combat line. So that event took place on the north of Sinkovka and in this area, and also we still haven't received any confirmations that the Russians managed to enter the village and to capture. So obviously we still received just the speculations and nothing more. Also, we haven't received during the day any confirmations that video confirmations that the Russians managed to capture Ivanovka. Also, we discussed this update in the previous video, but as I understand, that also was something like speculation. Now we are moving to Kherson. We will finish the video with Kherson direction. As you can see, significant number of bombardments, and we also got one of the most important video from Kherson direction. Of course, the situation in Skrinki is the same as we saw yesterday. The Russians are bombing this territory heavily with TOS flamethrower systems, with guided bombs, so no changes. No changes on the ground. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are trying to do anything. So the regular situation, we will bypass this territory. The same story on the north of Peshchanivka, Pridniprovska. The Russians continue destroying the Ukrainian infrastructure and facilities, artillery forces in this area, and so the same story as we saw yesterday. But today we got a very important update, and that update took place on this bit among the southern islands in the vicinity of the city village like Belogrudovo, Dniprovska, Gola Pristan. Let's take a look at this video. From the first side, when I saw this video, first I didn't even understand what was this video about. But later in description to this video, I saw that the author told, you see this something like straight lays on the river. This is a barge. This is a big ship. It's not like a ship that can move along the oceans or seas. This is a big ship for the river. The ship that the Ukrainians can use or could use for the deployment of a lot of like supply, even armored vehicles, tanks, and probably light vehicles. So the Ukrainians took a decision to test this system in the river and to understand what the Russians can do, what are the Russians' possibilities, whether the Russians are able to sink this ship, to get this ship, or whatever, because they first, before starting any landing operation using this type of big barge with this big lots of vehicles, they need to test this type of transport equipment somewhere along the river, and they took a decision to do this on the southern islands. And the Russians tried to hit this ship for a very long time. At some point probably they managed to damage, but we haven't received any geolocated proof that that ship was destroyed by the Russians and the ship sank in the river. We didn't have this geolocated confirmation. Anyway, the area of this video also very interesting. As you can see, the Russians were bombing this ship around in the vicinity of Belogrudovo. And if you remember, in November we got the first updates that somehow the Ukrainians managed to cross Dnipro River and to establish their foothold in this part of the village, and according to information we have, this territory was captured by the Ukrainians during the landing operation and so on. And currently the Ukrainians try to improve their positions in the vicinity of Gola Pristan. Maybe they want to do the same as we see right now in Krynki. And for this landing operation, the Ukrainians are trying to use heavy ships, not like fast boats in the vicinity of Krynki. So the situation develops very interesting, and the Ukrainians are trying to find new way how to redeploy forces from one bank to another as much as possible, as much as possible forces, as many as possible soldiers, tanks, armored vehicles, equipment, food, medicines, and so on. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.